What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, Buell. So yeah, Erik was made part of a pitch to Harley to create a sport bike range under the parent company of Harley. Once again, everything would be done externally at Buell Motorcycle Company. And this time Harley said, "Keep doing you, boo-boo. Just give us some time to think about it, okay?" They didn't quite immediately say yes, but they kept a real close eye on Mr. Buell and allowed him to continue using Harley parts. Because deep down, they knew when it came to road bikes, this kid just might be onto something. The moment where the two would become actual partners will come a few years later, but we're still in 1987 for now, so let's not jump the gun, eh? Yeah, so remember, Buell was building his RR1000 out of the crate of engines that he was able to acquire from Harley. This means that his supply was limited to the 50 engines that he had in his possession. Between 1987 and 1988, Buell had completed 50 bikes that were packing those XR1000 engines, and he also managed to sell the lot. Not bad for a guy who didn't exactly have all the resources that a big firm would have. That said, the fat stack of cash in his pockets went towards the purchase of 65 1200cc Evo engines, fresh off the Harley design board. He took these engines and went to work to create the, you guessed it, RR1200 Battle Twin. Naturally, the RR1200 was based on the RR1000, but it was respecified to mount the new Evo motor. The bike, it hasn't quite aged well. It's very lumpy and stubby. More than anything, it looks like a big angry bar of slightly used soap propelling itself through time. But who cares what this thing looks like, right? The fact is, it was an aerodynamic god, dude. If we call bikes without fairings naked bikes, well, this bike is so clothed that it's practically a 19th century nun. Still, this sister had some real get up and go because it was just so damn light. With only 65 examples built between 88 and 89, these things sold like hotcakes. So by the time Erik had finished building and selling his run of road and track bikes in 1989, Erik had realized that he had actually developed a market that just wanted his American-made, well-balanced, and rather spunky machines not just to set lap time records or even to visit the track or the twisties at all. People started lining up for a more practical Buell machine. Buell delivered on these concerns by making a version of the RR1200 that was more street friendly. He basically removed the big soap bar fairing and replaced it with a much more service friendly half fairing. That also allowed that beautiful Evo power plant to be shown off with its dope header pipes and shiny air filter. Buell also added a passenger seat to his new run of bikes. And one thing that kind of made me laugh is this big cowl thing back there. You know, this is one of those things that indicate just how much creative control Erik Buell still had over his enterprise, as well as, you know, just how much Buell infused his own personality into his bikes. See, this cowl piece served two functions. When riding alone, it made the bike appear more sporty, and it also helped hold the rider in place, you know, when you're accelerating hard. When you had a passenger, you would just flip up the thing, and it also functioned as a backrest for the passenger. Why? Well, Buell says when he was younger, he popped a wheelie and his passenger fell off the bike. Oops, right? Well, check it out, ladies. Or guys, too. I mean, this is an inclusive channel. Buell is looking out for you, you know, if your man decides that two wheels is just way too easy. He called his bike the RS1200, and he sold just over 100 of them through 1989 and 1990. Yo, you keeping up with me amongst all the XRs and RRs and RSs and 1000s and 1200s and you are keeping up? Okay, good, because I'm about to change that. The main crux of all the bikes up until this point is that they were running the Harley transmissions limited to a measly 4 speeds. Even riders used to 5-speed transmissions were left clicking up looking for a gear that didn't exist, and 6-speed riders probably thought they were just riding a broken bike. The second run of RS1200 bikes had 5-speed transmissions installed. This run also came from the factory with stainless steel brake lines, 6-piston calipers, and an improved engine mount system that further decreased the vibrations. And then he did another run of bikes in the same family a year later. Actually, no, it was within the same year. It was called the RSS 1200, which was literally the same bike, but Buell just decided that he was no longer looking out for the ladies and guys because he yeeted that back seat out of existence. By the time 1993 was in full swing, Buell had created and sold 325 of the RS and RSS bikes, and that was history. And thank God, because I'm about ready to move on from this fucking bike. So, in 1993, at this point, Papa Harley sees the viability of Buell's business and they decide to get involved, but only as a minority partner, not via ownership. So they acquire 49% of Buell's company. Now, this is where phase 2 of this little series begins, because now that Mr. Buell is more or less established, with successful sales, a strong manufacturing plant, and some serious financial backing, we should focus more towards the bikes themselves in a timeline fashion, instead of focusing on the man himself. In 1994, Buell had introduced the S2 Thunderbolt. He used that tried and true 1200cc Evolution engine, but This time it was much more swoopy than the RSS that came before it. I'll take this opportunity to describe the specs of the Evo engine to you as well. The Evo engine was a 45-degree V-twin, with 2 valves per cylinder that were moved via push rods. Exact displacement was 1203 cc's, and the engine was air-cooled. Power would vary, but with previous bikes you were looking at around 60 plus horsepower, and on the S2 they got it up to 76 horsepower at 5,200 RPM. Torque was strong at 66.4 foot-pounds at 5,500 RPM. Thunderbolt was a bit heavier though, 480 pounds away. The S2 was a product of Harley's new investment into the company. The S2 was naturally able to be sold at a price much lower than the RS models because now that Harley, the big manufacturer, was behind them, they were less boutique-y, so to speak. In 1994, they built 300 of them. And for 1995, they also built a sport touring model and they added saddlebags, better wind protection, higher bars, comfortable foot pegs, all the good stuff. Oddly enough, for 1996 though, Buell introduced the all-new S1 Lightning. And you would think it would be like, the Buell S3 to indicate that it's the next model, but nah, this bike is the prequel or something, I don't know. But is it me or does this bike still look pretty damn sick 22 years after it was introduced? To be honest, I think this is one of those timeless designs, like a Ducati Monster, for example. It doesn't just look good for its time, it just looks good. I like those muscular but short bikes. It makes sure that nothing really gets too overextended in terms of the design, like nothing gets tiring on the eye. The bike also made pretty impressive power and it was kitted out, which placed it high among the fledgling naked bike class. I mean, if you need any more proof, this bike was actually named Hooligan Bike of the Year by Cycle World. The Kevlar belt drive system put out 80-odd horses to the asphalt. This is definitely the first bike that we covered in this miniseries that I honestly would not mind owning. But it's time to move on. Time to move on to the actual sequel to the original S2 Thunderbolt. And that came later that year with the S3 Thunderbolt. S3 Thunderbolt and the touring-oriented S3T. Selling in 1996 alongside the S1 Lightning, the S3's main difference from the S2 were the engine upgrades for power, and in 1999 the S3 had gained an all-new cast aluminum swing arm, and it also came with improved suspension and fuel injection as well. Despite this, many purists tend to appreciate the hand-built nature of the S2. The S3, the S3T, and the S1 all sold a combined 2,000 bikes, which was unprecedented for Buell. In 1997, the M2 Cyclone was introduced. It was a little less remarkable compared to the super cool S1 because it was mainly made to appeal to a crowd that preferred a calm standard position ride. Big wide seat, fairly chill power curve, and standard forks. Just a calm bike with, the power when you need it. Now with a lineup of 4 bikes, Buell had sold a total of 3,000 bikes for that year, overall. Now let's take a step back from the bikes and talk about the engine. The Buells up until this point were still running Sportster Evo engines, albeit with some sporty tuning and a few changes. In 1998, Buell introduced the Thunderstorm heads, which is not only a great name for a punk band, but it was also an engine upgrade that was placed into this newly revised S1 for the year, which was dubbed the S1 White Lightning. Now, if you're like me, and you thought the S1 was cool already, bam! Look at that. This shit is so fire, they burned it in the poster. 101 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. The Thunderstorm heads basically turned the air-cooled Sportster motor into something a little bit more beastly. The upgraded heads were actually reverse compatible with Sportster models at the time. While Buell motors were very similar to those in Sportsters, they often had lighter flywheels, different cams, and now the Thunderstorm heads. They began on the S1 White Lightning, and as you guessed it, the overall sales grew to over 5,000 bikes for 1998. I should note that around this time in 1998, Harley bought a majority of Buell Motorcycle Company, witnessing its very impressive viability. By that point, BMC had officially become a subsidiary of Harley-Davidson, which will come with some serious benefits the following year. The Buell X1 Lightning was introduced in 1998, which basically sought to quickly improve on the shortcomings of the S1 Lightning. The X1, in an attempt to address the criticisms, added a smaller air filter, which kind of sucks because I actually kind of like the big old one, even though it was asymmetrical. That was kind of weird. If they would have put two, maybe a fake one, I don't know. They gave it a belly pan because apparently people thought the exhaust was ugly. They gave it a larger seat for more comfort, a comfortable footrest, a better cooling system, and also that big old iconic aluminum subframe swooping away. Oh, and it was fuel injected too. The X1 was sold alongside the revised M2s, S3s, and S3Ts. The total sales figure of 5,000 for 1998 jumped to 8,000 bikes in 1999. And the good vibes didn't stop there. Thanks to HD, Erik and his team were able to acquire a new 42,000 square foot facility over there in Wisconsin. Really, things were never better going into the new millennium. And with Mr. Buell looking for new ways to use his resources, he turned to the beginner bike segment because remember, this is year 2000 and Kawasaki owned the beginner bike segment with its indestructible, versatile, long-running, super cheap, and well-known Ninja 250. There were other beginner bikes out there, sort of, but the Ninja 250 was the undisputed champ. Well, Erik, striving to create a dispute, went to the drawing board to create a super cheap and slow beginner bike. Enter the Buell Blast. The bike wasn't just equipped with a fun name, it also had a rather unremarkable but still noteworthy engine. The Blast was running a 492cc thumper, which obviously was very different from the Harley twins that were running in every single Buell since the RR1000. I can't lie, for the longest I thought that the Blast just had a little baby twin in there, but no, that's a single cylinder. And then when I found that out, I was like, wait, that's a lot of R&D to develop a whole new engine for what is just a beginner bike meant to be cheap. Wait a second, is that basically just half of an Evo NG? Yes, it is. Wet weight was 400 pounds and the engine was air-cooled. Choke was automatic, which gave it a fuel injection feel during cold days. Yo, this thing was definition of cheap though. Some might even say that it was too cheap. Like, yeah, it was the cheapest thing you could buy, but that basically meant that the bike had to be built like crap to keep the cost down. If you ragged on a Blast, it definitely would not last as long as a Ninja 250 would. The Blast was more or less a vehicle to learn on for a season and then you just chuck it somewhere. But for even less, you could simply buy and use Ninja 250, which would get you an extra cylinder, liquid cooling, 4 valves per cylinder, 11 more horses, a 6-speed transmission, and just a much better fit and finish. Also, since the Ninja 250 had been around since dinosaurs were running about, you could fix it for cheap and parts were available. But, you know, if you had to have a Buell and you were just starting out with motorcycles, you had the Blast as a choice. You just had to accept that if you rode the Blast, you would be last. If we just disregard the specs and the cheapness, I think the Blast is a pretty cool looking bike. I mean, it takes the less is more approach and combines that with the very modern styling. And this can be capitalized on, especially when you see like the customs that people make out of them. As with any Buell chassis itself, it's extremely unique and it just begs to be modified. They kept making these things up until 2009, but 2002 and 2003 marked a major step forward for Buell because this was the year that the most iconic Buell body style was dropped, the twin spar frame models. This distinction comes from the fact that Buells were running around with tubular frames before this, so it was a pretty significant departure in design. If you think Buell, odds are you're either thinking of the XB9 or XB12 models. But for the sake of chronology, let's talk about the XB9R Firebolt, which was running a relatively small 984cc Evo engine that was housed inside of a super unique aluminum twin spar frame. It's unique because it's actually hollow up there towards the top of the steering head where the two beams angle out. I'm about to blow your mind if you don't actually know about this. The XB series actually kept the gasoline inside of the frame. This gas tank, quote unquote, was actually just an airbox cover because remember how the airbox would be put to the side of the tubular bike's engines? This created space on the top while keeping the weight low down. The swing arm also held the oil for the engine in the hollow space towards the linkage and pivot. What this made for was a very light bike at 450 pounds wet considering how heavy the motor is. It was also a bike with an extremely short wheelbase. Those might be obvious benefits, but it also allowed for a high flow airbox since no space was needed on top to fit gas. Obviously things like these are first on a production motorcycle, quote unquote, but I think we can all agree that despite how weird and futuristic they might be, they are a bit oddball, you know? Who else but Buell would actually think of all that stuff and then pull it off? So what else did the XB9 pioneer? Well, I'm sure you saw this brake disc and thought, yes, the brake discs that were rim mounted via the outside of the rims instead of near the axle in the center. This allows for much stronger braking force that can be milked out of a single front disc, especially when combined with that meaty 6-piston caliper chomping away at it. What Buell had made was a braking system that could hang with the typical dual disc twin caliper setup, but with much less weight by ditching half of it. Another benefit of the rim disc was the ability to run lighter wheels due to better distributed braking force. You can see how thin those spokes are. They were basically able to get the lightness of magnesium wheels while still using the cheaper aluminum. Unfortunately, the Evo engine had begun to be a little old in the tooth. Buell was able to squeeze out 92 horsepower despite the fact that the engine was actually bored down from 1200. He further improved the engine with different cases altogether, cams, crank assemblies, transmission upgrades, you name it. Some liked it, but some were still not very impressed by the motor at this point, because the thing about the XB9R was that it wanted to be a full-on sport bike with all of its technology and low clip-ons, but the engine was a bit archaic. Some people felt that one of two things needed to happen. One, the new engine needed to either somehow receive a boost in power, or two, the motor needed to be placed into a naked bike chassis where it was way more suited. Now, up until this point, Buell has actually been very good at addressing criticisms. So, which path did he choose?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Yes, Buell decided that the world could both use a faster XBR and also a naked street fighting one. But let's talk about the XB9S Lightning. Yeah, baby, the Lightning from the 90s was back, and it looks mean. It was a naked version of the XB9R, complete with high bars, a one-piece seat. Although you'd have to be mad to put anyone back there, because this bike has the wheelbase of a unicycle. Fuck it, I'm leaving that in. It also has what I believe to be a much better looking tail section than the R version. And don't get me wrong, I like half fairings, but the R version looks like it was just slapped on there. The S had Triumph-esque dual headlights that kept it clean, but not too outdated with a big single one. 2003 also marks an important year because it was this year that they were fully acquired by Harley Davidson. Erik had sold his entire soul, all of the percentages, but was still at the helm of operations. And shit was actually pretty good for a while. The following year in 2004, they dropped the XB12 platform. The R version of the 12 ran alongside the XB9R, but only briefly before it later replaced it. The XB12S, which was a naked version in the same vein as the 9S to the 9R, immediately replaced the 9S, but then they brought it back as the Lightning City X XB9SX. XXX. The 1200 motor in this application was putting out 103 horses and 84 foot-pounds, but it weighed a little bit more. Buell liked the 12 platform so much that they didn't stop at a naked and R model. They also made a strange dual sport / adventure type XB12 called the Ulysses XB12X, alongside the Ulysses XB12XT that was the touring version. Okay, this is getting confusing. They made a long wheelbase version called the XB12S Lightning Long. I like what they did with the S's there. They made one lowercase for some reason. I don't know. They made one with a lower center of gravity where they dropped the seat height, the ride height, and the pegs, and they called it the Buell XB12 SCG. CG stands for center of gravity. And they made another one. Called, and I'm not joking either, this one was called Buell XB12 STT Lightning Super TT. It was basically Buell waking up from a night terror screaming, "We need a supermoto!" And so Papa Buell ran to one of the drawing boards that he requires to be within a 20-foot radius of him at all times. I imagine this is probably how every single one of these bikes got made. Erik just busts in a room like, "Adventure bike! Short people! Touring!" Between one of these moments, Erik also called to create a full race bike. I'm talking track only, not legal for the road race bike. They only made 50 of them, but let me tell you, they squeezed every drop of power out of that Harley engine for this one. They brought it up to 1300cc, and they managed to get 150 horsepower out of it. Because, I know you sport bike guys are looking at these bikes like the XB12, XB9, like, that's it? Just, 90 horsepower, 100 horsepower out of a 1200cc engine. Yeah, I know that even this 150 horsepower isn't much compared to even road-going sport bikes these days, but you have to remember that they were working with a pushrod air-cooled motor dating mostly back to the late 80s. At that point, you have to admit that that's pretty impressive, right? I feel like we should call it a part here, folks. We covered a lot, and there's still a lot more left, so I'll wrap up this mini-series in a part 3 video, which is something I never had to do before, so it feels kind of weird doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, the unfortunate part is from here, things start to go downhill. Next time, I'm going to teach yous about the Great Recession of '08, and you're gonna like it. I'll see you in part 3.